useful space. It's like BandAid it until you can afford to rip it off.
Or just rip it off. Whether you can afford it or not, that's
like
my
Patrick
plan.
did on his first house.
You guys are a big fan of ripping things apart before you have a solution.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by GBA Senior Editor Kiley Jacques.
Hello.
Digital Brand Manager for Fine Homebuilding, Rob Watzak.
Hey there.
And our producer, Jeff Rose.
Hi.
You can find
Tech
previous
wizard.
What?
Tech wizard.
Please email your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. You can find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. Well, it is good to see you all this morning. You are the bright spot in my morning because I am suffering from back pain. Something that I'm sure a lot of our listeners know something about. Yeah. And the weird thing is I don't have any idea what I did except for sleeping. So someone explain that to me. That or I have a tumor.
Don't say that. Don't say that.
Rob, what have you been doing on your place?
Oh, I'm always bouncing around doing different projects, but, I told you guys last year, what was it, that I found a giant stone wall for free around the block from my house and took 4 truckloads of rocks, and they've been
So
piled up in my backyard ever since. I've been chipping away at it, but finally one of the bigger projects I've done with it, I just had an inspiration, and my terrace is on this steep hillside and it's just dirt, and I just wanted to make it look a little tidier. So I built a nice little, I don't know, what would you call it? It's like it's a stone wall.
I call it a planter.
It's a planter. Yeah. It's about 4 feet in diameter, and it kind of slopes down the hillside, so it's only about 4 inches tall on the terrace side, and it's about 2 feet tall on the downhill side. And I divided a big big miscanthus that I had in my property, and
that's no small job.
Plopped that
dividing
in the middle.
miscanthus.
Yeah, I've done it's. I know. Every time I have to divide one of those grasses, my wife is like, "Are you sure you want to do that?" I'm like, "No, I got it down to a science. I got sharp spades and saws and all kinds of stuff that
Aren't you supposed to use an axe?
What I usually do is I have a flat bar that must weigh about 100 pounds, like one of those
awesome.
landscape pry bars that has a blade that's about 2 or 3 inches
It's not
wide.
100 pounds though.
No,
I don't know. At my
like
age,
50.
it feels like that.
You clearly have been an editor too long.
That could, yeah.
That's one of my favorite tools. I love that.
Maybe it's 50 pounds. I don't know, but.
And how'd that go? So
it went
I can
great.
explain my back injury vicariously through your labors.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly was expecting my back to be in pain after that one, but I don't know. I guess I've gotten some good rock lifting techniques down. But I basically started right after work a couple of days ago and finished it by sunset, as you can see in the picture that I sent you guys.
Yeah, it looks great.
That's cool. So how many stones do you have left?
Plenty. I could build like 5 more of these things easily. But
I need some. I've been working with Fieldstone lately too. I need more. I think
Kylie, you probably have no shortage of stones from the river,
no, I do.
right?
I actually have excavated, I think, all of what I'm going to find on this property on my
It's time to go to your
triple
neighbor's
lot.
property.
Yeah. I've been working on my stone wall because last year I did a terrible job. I have that little retaining wall. It must be, I would say, it's probably 80 feet long because I have a double lot plus a lot next door. So anyway, it's a long wall. It's very short. It's probably only 2 feet tall. But I did a pretty terrible job with it a year and a half. I guess it was 2 years ago. With mortar, I wanted to mortar it. And I didn't know what I was doing, and it's all crumbling, and it looks terrible. So I've been chipping away, getting rid of the mortar, and I have to figure out, I think I want to just dry stack it, or most of it.
I think that's the way to go.
Yeah, but that requires real patience and more rock, because I don't have all of what I need to make it look nice and level. So that's a challenge. That's a puzzle. So, Rob, I need some of that rock.
Well, you know what? I go on Facebook Marketplace all the time, and all the time I see people giving away rock because it's in their way.
That's good to know. I never thought
which
about
is
going there for
surprising
that.
because if I bought that rock from the local mason supply, they'd charge me like $400 a pallet for it. But
I know, it's beautiful. I would say the fieldstone around here is absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah.
So
But
That's
I
why all
find
the
that,
farmers piled it against their, edges of their fields, right? Because they thought it was so pretty.
yeah.
that's one reason. Maybe,
Yeah,
maybe. I think it had more to do with property lines.
For anybody who's never been to New England, there must be 50,000 miles of those dry laid stone walls just meandering through the woods around here from when it was all farmland.
I love
and
that.
it's pretty cool to go into the woods and discover sort of like, it's like archaeological
Totally.
digs,
Jeff,
Yeah.
you want to describe your backyard?
Well, it's got stone walls running all around it and lots of rocks
Right.
but it's all woods now. So except
Yeah.
I've cleared the underbrush, so there's actually grass under the trees, which is kind of cool.
It
It's
must
beautiful.
be successional forest, right?
Yeah. Yeah, because all of New England
All
was
of
denuded,
Connecticut.
right?
Well,
Yeah.
mostly Connecticut is
Yeah.
chopped to the ground.
What have you been working on, Jeff?
Just mostly working in the yard, spreading mulch and trimming hedges and fun stuff like that.
It's a good time to be outside. Kylie, have you had any projects lately?
That's what I just talked about, my little wall. And I also have, it's interesting after 3 years in the garden or the landscape, it's things are starting to happen that didn't happen before I had it good. Now I'm at war over here. The deer have discovered my arborvitae hedge. The frost nipped all of my lilac blooms, which was so unfortunate. And I've got a viburnum curling leaf issue. So those are all new problems that are discouraging. It's been a sick year all around, even in the landscape.
I think if you're
the
into
pandemic hit my
landscaping,
landscape.
I'm sorry. I think if you're into landscaping, there's always some problem. Am I right? There's always some plant that's not living up to expectations, or the deer or other pests are creating problems.
Yeah, you're right.
I think electric fencing around your whole place would take care of a lot of that stuff.
Never gonna happen. I used cedar oil on my hedge. We'll see if that was any good in deterring the deer.
I haven't heard of anything that deters deer from eating arborvitae. I'm curious to hear if that'll work.
Yeah, I'll let you know. Apparently, I've been told it's pretty successful, so we'll see.
Although I do kind of like the lollipop effect that they get once it gets tall enough that they can't reach the top.
I hate that so much. I'd rip it out in an instant if it starts to look like that.
So
Anyway.
you planted those?
Oh yeah, it was a lot of work. I've got 11 of them.
And no one
Yeah.
told you at the garden center that
You know what? I'm so
arborvitae
embarrassed.
is deer caviar?
You would think after 22 years in the field that I would know that, and I did not know that. And I have a lot of deer in this area, and just the other day I saw a very old one meandering down toward the one of my arborvitae.
You're
And
keeping
it's
that thing going, Kylie.
It's the first I think so. He's on a senior diet.
Yep. Kylie's deer sanctuary.
Anywho.
As always, we got some good feedback from our listeners. This comes from our friend Dan Colbert. He was referencing a conversation we had in episode 354 regarding hiring your first employee. He says, I must be getting really old. Don't answer that. It used to be pretty rare that a conversation on starting out in the construction business proceeded for more than a minute without someone recommending David Gerstel's classic, Running a Successful Construction Company, a book probably older than The Young Guy in Boise. I looked it up. That was first published in 1991, so there's probably a good chance of that. My first copy discussed making sure your calculator had a paper ribbon and mused on whether personal computers would prove useful, but it's still essential reading. In the interim, David has published his magnum opus, Nail Your Numbers. It's huge, but every chapter is an education in itself. I have helpfully included my review from JLC. Well, thanks, Dan.
Patrick, you've recommended that book a few times, haven't you? Isn't
Yeah,
that
and
one
it escaped me in our conversation with the hiring your first employee, and I should have mentioned it, but it is a good one.
I when I was first starting out in the business, I went to one of those local mentorship groups. Connecticut has this thing called SCORE. I'm not sure what it stands for. It's an acronym for something. And the book they give looks like it's kind of a cheesy pamphlet, but so it kind of discouraged me from being able to learn from other people how to do that stuff. But I took a look at David's book, because obviously it's a Taunton book, so we have it around. And somebody commented on how it felt like they were getting advice from a dozen, seasoned contractors, and David in his revision in 2002 in his intro was talking about that. He's like, actually it was dozens. So and you read through this book and it does feel like that. It feels like you're sitting in a room, you're having a conversation with a whole bunch of people who have been in the business for a long time, and it's kind of amazing the level of detail he goes into about the advice that they give in that. So I think everybody should read that if they're even if they're already a successful contractor.
Yeah, and his later book, Know Your Numbers, goes into more detail on, getting better at running a business. I think so many people enter the construction business because it's something they love, and it doesn't necessarily mean they love business or running a business, but that's part of it to succeed.
Helm Solutions up in Brattleboro, Vermont, they have a really interesting model whereby they work with contractors who, like you just said, got into the business because they love it, but they're not good at the business piece of it. And so they work with Helm Solutions to beef up their skill set in that realm. It's a really very cool company. Anyway, just made me think of it.
It's not a construction company. It's a consulting firm.
It's kind of a consulting firm. They offer a number of services. Construction and design is part of it, but really their whole impetus is for getting people to get to a point where they feel like their business is very well-rounded and healthy on all fronts. So it entails a number of different things, but I hadn't come across a company whose mission was that, so it stuck with me.
That's cool. Mm-hmm. So our friend Sean McCadden does something similar, and we... lots of folks need help with their business. So, Rob, this is feedback for you. This came from YouTube. UIL1980 wants to know where you get this pool kit that you talked about, and I forget where you mentioned that, what episode, but do you know what that is?
Yeah, in fact, I actually went back to the show notes from that episode and added the links there too. So anybody who hears that episode will... What
is the company so folks who are at their computer... It's
pretty simple to remember. It's insulatedpoolkits.com. So...
I bet you can't buy one of these for love or money right now.
Well, I don't know, because it's this obscure little company in California with like a website that looks like it was built in 1998. And I watched the YouTube video, and this guy's like an older engineer. And if you watch you know how you can change the speed of a YouTube video?
Yes.
If you watch it at 1.5 speed, he sounds like he's talking like a normal person. He's like,
does he have a drawl?
He's like, oh, and then you take this piece of... But anyway, it's interesting because it's like, basically you can buy just the foam panels from them, or you can buy the foam panels and this like liquid membrane that they rave about that they use as a pool liner.
So you put this membrane on the styrofoam?
So you plaster the styrofoam. You basically do like a stucco coat on the styrofoam, and then you pour a grade beam around the top. But before you pour that grade beam, you embed this mesh into the stucco that laps into the grade beam, and that's what holds the whole thing all together. And it seems kind of like a funky thing, but if you really break it down into its parts, it's like a fascinating... It's obviously designed by an engineer because it's all about efficiency of materials.
Did you take a video of you doing all of those steps?
Oh, no, this isn't the one I built. This is something that I've been looking into, and I basically bailed on what I talked about last time is I bailed on the pool project and bought my family a blow-up hot tub, which they really enjoy.
I forgot. Yeah.
And it's costing me, I checked, it's costing me a couple bucks a day to heat that thing, which isn't too bad. And with my solar panels, I'm still in the black with my solar production, so.
I'm going to come over there and rest my back.
Yeah, you should.
It sounds so nice.
And while you're here, my massage therapist, who lives just down the street from me, she specializes in people with injuries and chronic pain. So you should check that out too.
Trip to New Milford.
Did you say who are a chronic pain or who have chronic pain?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm ready. So this comes from Ted. Ted asks, hey, podcast crew, I'm working with a client to design and build a workshop underneath their new garage addition using precast concrete slabs for the garage deck. The original goal was a 9-foot floor to ceiling height for the workshop. However, this puts the workshop floor over 2 foot 6 inches lower than the adjacent basement concrete slab floor. Obviously, the lower we go, the more difficult it becomes to build, and costs go up both internally at the intersection of old and new and outside in trying to make the grading work. My question, how important is a 9-foot ceiling height in a shop? Would an 8-foot ceiling height be a huge compromise or no big deal? The client is a passionate DIYer who is very excited about his new workshop space, and I want to make sure the space exceeds his expectations and is worth the investment he's putting into it. Most of his projects are wood-related, including repurposing cabinets, interior trim renovation, and other fun with wood projects. Love your show, Ted.
Well,
Jeff, why don't you take this one first?
Okay. I don't know. That's a tough call. I mean, it's like, that's really a question for the client, I would think.
Yeah, that's what I think too. You should do a cost analysis.
Especially if he's doing cabinets, it's like, if you've got a 8-foot cabinet you're trying to build, you kind of need more than 8 feet to stand it up and work on it.
There is some math involved in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't you think a cost analysis of both scenarios, if possible, would be the way to go, and then put it to the client? Like, this is what you're going to spend for 9 feet. This is what you're going to spend for 8 feet. Is it worth it to you?
Honestly, I think like you're onto something, Jeff, there. It's like, obviously the projects that you're working on are the biggest concern, but also if there's any chance that you are working with plywood in your projects, you do not want an 8-foot tall because you cannot maneuver plywood in a shop that's 8 foot tall because the plywood is 8 feet. And that's, I can tell you from experience. I've worked in shops where they had low ceilings, and I've worked in shops where they had high ceilings. And I made my barn with an 8.5-foot ceiling, and I wish I went to 9 because maneuvering plywood in there is a pain in the butt.
I'd say make it 10.
Yeah, I was going to say
just
9.
go all in. No, I think you need 9 feet. I really do, especially if, like Rob says, you're using common building materials. You need a little more height.
Do you think it makes sense?
Alternatively, build a separate shop building, like a pole barn or something, and have 2 shops. That's what I say.
That sounds like a cost savings.
Yeah, or a covered outdoor workspace. Yeah, like if you could do a covered outdoor workspace for working on the big stuff on a nice day, because that's all I can do. I can't do big projects in my little barn, so I have to wait for sunny days. And I would love to have just a pavilion in my yard, even just a big roof on posts.
So what projects have you been involved in that you found you couldn't do because your ceiling was too low?
Well, cabinetry is the main thing, working with doors. But for me, it's also just a matter of space too, because like you can't set up a table saw and rip plywood in a room that's only 15 by 18, because you got no room for anything else in the room when you're doing that.
Right. Yeah, bigger's kind of a safe bet when you're building a workshop. What were you going to say, Jeff?
I was just saying that's what track saws are for.
Right.
Yeah.
It does seem like this is the client's choice, though, to me.
Well, I mean, you have to steer your clients in the direction that's going to make them happy, right? I mean, I think contractors have a lot of push and pull with clients. They're looking to you for guidance, and if you tell them 8 foot is fine, and it's not later.
Well, why don't you tell them that 8 foot has its limitations, but this is what you're going to spend for 9?
Yeah, I think that's a good scenario, Kylie. I really do, because they're paying the bills, and then they're going to have to live with it afterwards.
Exactly.
So make it their problem to decide what they want to do, right?
Give them all the information. Yeah.
And I don't think the transition between the old and new basement is going to be that big a deal. You just have a step or two, right?
Which is money.
More than that, because it's 2 foot 6. This two steps would not be enough. It's steps. It's some steps.
Not drop-offs, right?
This comes from our friend Kathryn. Dear FHB podcast, I was noodling around and found that Foamglas, The glass-based insulation has returned to the U.S. This seems like the perfect below-ground insulation and might even work for exterior roof insulation because of its high strength and fire resistance. It seems like an interesting complement to rock wool. Do you have any thoughts about it? Obviously, the embodied carbon might be high, so that's a concern. Rob, you seem to mention this most shows. Do you want to explain to folks what Foamglas is?
So Foamglas, I mean, it's if people have heard or you've seen that Glavel stuff, Glavel's basically broken up Foamglas, and what it is it's they have some kind of technology that basically puts tiny air bubbles in glass when they form it into shapes. So it kind of has the look of like charcoal colored like styrofoam. But honestly, I haven't really seen the stuff up close. I'm only basing that on photographs. And so she says it's returned to the U.S. I looked around. I don't see it being offered in like a retail or residential focused market, but I think it's never completely gone away in the commercial market. In fact, it seems like they use it a lot even in industrial for like pipe insulation and other things where they have to have something that's completely chemical resistant, because that's it. Basically, the benefit of this stuff is that it's impervious to just about everything. I mean, it's basically foamed rock, you know?
Yep. I was just on Ben Bogey's site. He's got it. They used it on that project in Sherman for the foundation. I asked him, I haven't heard back yet, but I know they laid it beneath it's a full basement, so they laid it beneath the concrete pour, but what I don't remember is if he told me that they used it on the walls of the basement too, but it's ideal for subgrade application, as she mentioned.
Because of its imperviousness to water, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And it's also
bugs.
got, more compressive strength than a lot of alternatives for bug resistant below grade insulations. The first time I ever saw it was there's a Green Building Advisor article from Alex Wilson from when he was renovating his house. He's from Building Green, and he used it to wrap his entire foundation.
Right.
And he seemed to like the stuff, but that was quite a few years ago. So I haven't really.
That was like 2011. He's written about it twice.
Does anybody know what this stuff costs?
It's more expensive than XPS, and our value is less than also. It's like 3.4 per inch. I don't know what it costs, but I think it says and Alex made this point that it's significantly more than XPS, but that the environmental benefits are better.
That's the thing I'm curious about, is because Kathryn asked about the embodied carbon, and honestly, I really would love for someone to publish, and I know there's some companies that do research on this stuff, but a real comprehensive, like complete list of construction materials with sort of a breakdown of life cycle analysis, stuff like that. And
sounds easy, Rob.
Yeah,
I think you
know.
should get on that.
It's near, but I found something on the Owens Corning website, because I don't know if they own the company or if they represent it or what, but that was like a lead checklist, bunch of points. So it gets a lot of lead, sustainability points for its value in both, energy and durability and that sort of stuff. But I couldn't find any information about like what kind of energy it takes to create this stuff, like how it compares to something like mineral wool.
And my assumption is it's not even made in this country. My guess is it's coming from somewhere else. Is that true, or am I off base on that?
Well, it's super popular in Europe.
Yeah.
But
I mean, they're not making it here, so that
I couldn't find that. So you're shipping
adds to the carbon.
I don't know. If anybody out there is using it, let us know. Hopefully we'll hear from Ben soon and talk about it next time.
Yeah, I was hoping he'd give me a little more info, but maybe he will. Yep.
The Glavel product is so promising to me. Unfortunately, you just can't get it. Like, wouldn't it be awesome to use, waste glass in such a useful application,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was heartened to learn that the wood fiber plant is going to be coming online. What do you know about that, Kylie?
Yeah, I was really excited. There's an update on GBA just this week. They're going to launch with their loose fill first. and they're going to have 3 lines: loose fill, bats, and the fiber board. The fiber board, I think, is probably what most people are excited about. I just think it gets used more, but that's a little bit way down the line. So they're setting to launch in 2022, but I don't know exactly when.
And the company is it GoLogic or GeoLogic?
It's an offshoot of GoLogic and called Timber HP. So there's been a lot of offshoots of what was originally GoLab, because now they have Opal architecture too, so they're getting into design, and then this production facility. It's a really interesting article. I'll share a link because it gives you a sense of the facility itself, which used to be an old paper mill up in Maine, and they're repurposing it for this production line, and I just think it's really interesting. It seems like a good fit.
We should mention the paper industry in Maine has been in decline for decades,
Exactly.
and there's tons of forest lands that are available to make this product, which is chopped up wood fiber that you can. I don't know. Is it just wood fiber, or do they have to add stuff to it?
Soft
we don't know.
wood fiber. I think that there's some additives, but they're pretty benign. I don't know what they are.
I'm presuming that there's some kind of flame retardant as part of the loose fill product, and I know the panel products are. There's a lot of paraffin in there to make them water resistant, right?
Yes, that sounds right.
So there's a growing number of the high performance builders who are, really concerned about the carbon that's going into their buildings, who are really loving that wood fiber insulation. In fact, Ben Bogey just did a bunch of videos on the website. There'll be a couple more coming out over the next couple of weeks about a house he's working on that's completely wrapped in that wood fiber board insulation.
It's that same house that I just mentioned. Yeah.
And it's fascinating because it just seems like, a lot of people in that industry think that it's just sort of like a magic bullet because it's just like using a really low carbon. In fact, it's supposedly, carbon storing in its life cycle. And it also behaves really well from an insulation and moisture management perspective. So.
Right. The last frontier is to not have to import it from Europe. So that's what's exciting about this production facility. It will be the first in the United States. So
they got their equipment and now they're in the process of putting the plant together, right?
Yes, it's much closer. I've been watching the development of this production facility for, I don't know, at least 2 years. So
I'm fishing for an invite to go see the thing when it's
I
up and
know.
running, right? I want to see this plant.
I would like to
Where
see
is
it
located?
too.
Belfast, Maine, I want to say.
Belfast, Maine. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, I'm heading up to Vermont soon, but that's a little far. Belfast's a bit further.
Your geography skills are dazzling, brother.
It's surprisingly, New England feels so small, but Maine feels so far away.
It does feel far away.
Maine is deceptively huge, right? It's huge.
It is.
And not much going on up there except for nature.
And wood fiber plants, apparently.
Yeah. Employment is scarce.
I'm guessing this is going to help that, right? Because folks have been displaced from the paper products industry for a long time, and now it's good to have something taking its place. My guess is if they're successful at this, we'll see more of it, because that's how it works.
That's the hope, yeah.
This comes from Jeff. Hey, Fine Home Big Bonfiglioli team. That's a new one. You've helped me every step of the way in renovating my foreclosure house and have not led me astray yet. Now I need to go back and fix work done before I owned the house and sprayed closed cell foam everywhere. The previous owner put on a greedy dormer and did it terribly. The slope is too low, less than 212. He only used 2x6 rafters and there's no ridge beam. Plus, the roof is too low to have a legal bedroom ceiling height. In hindsight, I should have ripped it off and put trusses up. Instead, for expediency and cost savings, I had the full cavity filled with closed cell foam, put it a load-bearing center wall, and hoped the newish metal roof would handle the snow melt. My plan works somewhat, but there are a few wet spots when the snow is melting. What do I do now? The easiest plan would be to take the ridge cap off and seal up the ridge in hopes that that's the problem. They left a vent strip. Or I could pull up the roof a section at a time, run ice and water shield on the whole surface vertically, and reattach the roof. Or while I'm at it, I can put down the ice and water shield, put furring strips vertically and then horizontally, and then put the panels back down with a good airspace. Or is it so low slope I should have it roofed with EPDM? The last option would be to leave it, save money, and then rip the whole second floor off and start again. But that's big money. What do you think? As always, thank you for your expertise and realistic thoughts. Well, boy, this is quite a conundrum here.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. I mean, if he sprayed it with the closed cell foam, was that before or after he put the metal roof on? Because I'm wondering why the roofer left that ridge vent, especially on such a low slope roof, because you're basically having snow sitting right there and possibly getting into the roof as it melts, you know? I mean, it's not uncommon in commercial to have a 2 and 12 metal roof, but you just have to do the membrane and flashing details properly.
Yeah.
So
I think he should wait and rip it off if he can stand to wait.
I don't know. Well, if he's got wet spots in his roof after it snows, I think that's a
Yeah.
little more urgent
True.
concern here. So
Especially with the closed cell foam, because there's not going to be any drying, right?
Drying.
yeah, I mean, if it truly is the ridge cap, that could be a relatively simple fix where you basically pull the ridge cap, do some good flash, really good sticky flashing tape on there, and put the cap back on. But
I think I would try that first, right? And
As a BandAid fix.
but I think a membrane roof is the way to go. When you have this low of a pitch, you need a watertight roof, not a water shedding roof, right? As Diami would say. And commercial roofers deal with low slope roofs all the time, and there are established details for the flashing and for terminating the edges of it and all this stuff. And that's really, I think, the right plan. Unfortunately, you're going to have to throw that metal roofing in the trash, but Rob is always willing to take that kind of stuff, so I would just give him a call.
This doesn't. That solution doesn't really address the fact that he's got an unusable space up there, right? Didn't he say that?
No, that doesn't help that at all.
Yeah. So there's that. I just want to throw in as.
That's why you're advocating to rip it off, Kylie?
Yeah, my thinking is to do that BandAid fix with the ridge cap, and then in time, really make your second floor something that you can use and that's legal. That's my thinking. But I understand.
I think that's the solution, Kylie. I really do.
Hey, I want to interject here because both of these questions point to something that's being addressed on the BS and Beer show tonight, and that's the idea of taking commercial products and construction methods and applying them to the residential building sector. And both Foamglas, which is typically used for insulating around furnaces and high temperature situations, and then this idea of the EPDM roof is also from the commercial industry. So I just wanted to throw that out there as a plug. I think it's going to be a really interesting show. Patrick may be on it.
That'll be in the past when this drops.
Oh, that's right. I always forget that.
Yeah, but
I'm so used to the live show now.
You'll be able to watch it on YouTube though, and on GBA.
Yep.
Who's on that panel, Kylie?
Doug Horgan. You always ask me, and I always forget. Let me get back to you. I'll find it. Doug Horgan, Bob Kovacs, and forget the last. Let me get back to you. Continue talking.
Jeff, I don't know if that's helpful at all, but you got to deal with this because you can't have water coming in your spray foamed roof assembly because it's never going to dry. And as Rob suggests, maybe if you can fix the ridge cap, it'll tide you over until you can rip the roof off, like Kylie suggests.
Rick Thomas.
That's going to be interesting. I'm definitely tuning in for that.
Yeah,
I'll tell you what. I mean,
do I have to host that, by the way, Kylie?
You're on standby because Doug is traveling and he might not be able to make it.
When am I going to know?
But since you're in pain, maybe I'll just be on standby. We'll see. I just figured you could add to that because it's something that you've discussed before on our podcast here.
I always say the same thing. When you want to do a flat roof correctly, don't go to a residential roofer, go to a commercial roofer. That's kind of that's the same boring thing I say every time.
I tell you what, I honestly feel like all residential builders should start like poking around on commercial projects and look for details that you don't see in residential, because some of the best things that have come over to residential in recent years are things that have been doing in commercial for years and years, like liquid applied WRBs and some of these insulation systems, and the concept of like the same way like Benson Wood does the houses that are built in a way that you can have a structure that's not integrated with its mechanical systems, so that you can change it easily when as your needs change over time.
What's the term that he uses for that? I always forget. Do you remember?
Decoupling, something like that, maybe. Or
I cannot remember what it is. It's a really interesting concept.
You mentioned fluid applied WRBs, Rob. Can you think of other things that are from the commercial world?
Oh, I know. I had a couple in my head, and I'm getting old. They all popped out of my head as I was started talking. But well, I mean, just some of those roofing systems and roofing materials. What else was there? I mean,
what I'm always amazed is how quickly like big boxes get put together. It blows my mind. It seems like it's months before and those things are ready to go. That's definitely a lesson to take away from the commercial sector, is how to
efficiency.
Coordinate things to get stuff done, because it costs less when you can get it done more quickly.
Well, panelization, is that from the commercial world?
I don't know. I mean, one thing, a friend of mine who's an architect wanted to do a big wall and door system in the front of his barn because it was his studio. And you see this a lot in modern houses where they take the window and door systems from commercial because they're these modular systems, and it's a much more flexible and possibly affordable way to get large insulated sections of glass in a house.
Completely customizable, right? You can make the glass any color. You can make the frames any color. I agree. That's something I always thought we would see more of in the residential world, but it hasn't seemed to really caught on.
Yeah, a lot of this stuff always trickles into modern home designs more, because
that's true.
The whole thing about modern design is it doesn't have to be stark, lifeless stuff like a lot of people who like traditional houses think it is. It just means that you're not tying your hands with like some of the design choices that you have. You're designing based on the uses and the site, not just on a traditional style that requires windows to be in a certain orientation and trim details to be a certain proportion. And
it's something that I would love to do, is to have like what amounts to a storefront, that looks onto a nice view with, good commercial doors and hardware. And I think that would be awesome. And I suspect it would be more affordable than these big folding patio doors that have gotten so popular that, often cost multiple tens of thousands of dollars, right?
Because they all come from Germany, right?
Yeah, and they're all custom made, and
Well, and they have to support a large expanse of door over a very. I mean, it's hard enough to hang a pair of French doors and get them to line up right. Can you imagine? A lot of these big sliding door systems, they require very careful installation. And in fact, a lot of those companies will even send representatives out to sort of train you on how to install the thing.
I've seen them installed, and it looks like a complete nightmare. I mean, and then the way they decide if it's adjusted correctly is you can't see light around the operating panels. And to me, that doesn't seem like that's
very
tight enough, right?
Yeah.
Well, if you can afford a door like that, and the payoff, I think, is worth it.
Yeah, it doesn't matter, right, Rob?
Yeah.
I bet they're a lot more popular on the West Coast. Given
I always see them there.
The architecture there, yeah.
When I have my gazillions of dollars, I'm gonna.
I can't picture you in a house like that, Patrick.
Jeff, what do you think about the roof plan before we go on to something else here?
Yeah, I agree with the idea of EPDM if you're going to keep the flat roof. But again, if you're going to have to raise that roof to make it usable. A useful space, it's like Band-Aid it until you can afford to rip it off.
Or just rip it off. Whether you can afford it or not, that's
like
my
Patrick
plan.
did on his first house.
You guys are a big fan of ripping things apart before you have a solution for it.
Well,
Dealing with it
I guess
after.
it depends on, what's going on in his life. It's like, does he
Yeah.
need that space? Does he have
Yeah.
Yeah.
a 4-year-old who can live in that room comfortably?
Right. Yeah, right.
What do you think the code required ceiling height is? Is it 7 feet? Do we know what that is?
I feel like it's like, when I was looking into renovating my attic, at least where I am, it was something like 50% of the roof had to be above 7 feet if you had a sloped ceiling in the room.
Well, if anyone else has any ideas what Jeff should do with his leaky roof, I'd love to hear him, because I don't know that there's really a good solution. There are good solutions. None are inexpensive or easy. That's the bottom line. Hello there, Floyd here. I moved into an existing home 4 years ago that was built in 2000. We're in climate zone 9/10, Lakeland, Florida. My first power bill was almost $350. I thought that was crazy high, so I started to work on said power bill and changed all the light bulbs to LED, then programmed the thermostat and installed a newer water heater and changed out all of our appliances. All of them were original to the house. The current situation is 5 or 6 months of the year. We are below $100 on our electric bill, and the high bills are now $178. In the main living area, I have issues of moisture around a couple AC vents. Poor air sealing is my thought. I would love to go up to the attic and remove all the insulation and air seal the ceiling. It's vaulted. I would build a dam and blow in new insulation. While up there, I would love to put in a radiant barrier with foam sheeting as well. But all this cost here in my mind is the problem. Would I see any benefit? While I'm up there, I would love to put in a whole house dehumidifier to make it more comfortable. So if I did all this, I am thinking I would not get a return on my investment. Well, I don't know.
I can't imagine he wouldn't see an appreciable difference with those changes. And air sealing alone is huge energy savings, right?
Yeah, and you could do that without going up into the attic, right? I mean, if it's possible, he could remove the ceiling registers, which I think is what he's talking about, that get condensation around them because they're cold, right? It becomes a condensing surface. And oftentimes almost always, they're steel or aluminum, so that's the perfect material to get condensation, right? So I would try and get either the interior humidity lower to control that, or air seal around the grills. I'm a little confused about his vaulted ceiling. He must have scissor trusses, so there's like some kind of space that is inaccessible but forms the roof structure and the ceiling, the vaulted ceiling below. So I'm a little confused on that, but let's assume he has scissor trusses. So climbing around in there is going to be no fun, is my guess.
Yeah, I mean, he's got a great list of possible solutions to his problems here, and I think that the best plan of attack is just sort of break them down into what are on a spectrum of ease and cost, and just start with. I mean, the air sealing, like you said, Kylie, is like that alone could solve a huge portion of the problems. Then maybe trying to see how that does, and then just sort of chip away at the problems. But yeah, certainly dehumidification probably isn't a bad idea. But once you get the air sealing done, you may not have the humid air infiltration problems as much. But again, we've talked about this a bit, how if your air conditioning system, especially in a hot, humid climate, isn't sized properly, it's not going to be taking care of the dehumidification on its own. So that adding dehumidification might certainly be something that he needs.
I have to latch on here to something that he mentioned, and you're talking about dehumidification. I was just on the phone for over an hour with an architect in Texas, Austin, Texas, Peter Pfeiffer, who's developed this really interesting radiant barrier roof system. He's been nuancing it and fine-tuning it for 20 years, and I'm about to write about it in the next issue of Fine Homebuilding magazine. So keep an eye out for that so you get to see all the details. We'll have a nice illustration to go along with it. But the whole impetus for this this was that in a hot, humid climate, people were spending gobs and gobs of money to dehumidify their attics, and that this system takes care of that and removes all those mechanical costs. So there's something to be said for that. He uses Galvalume metal roofing, unpainted. Let's see, he puts down furring strips. He calls them lathing strips. I'm assuming that's the same thing, right? They look like the same thing to me. 1x3, I think, or maybe 1x4. But and they're laid down
Angled, right?
angled on a diagonal to correspond with the valleys, with gaps, 2 to 3 inch gaps between the end of the boards, so that the air circulation. So essentially, what he's creating is a sealed attic space with a vented roofing system. So it's really interesting
meant to
me.
lower attic temperatures primarily, right?
Right, and it also lowers humidity as a result.
Yeah, so in effect, he's venting the roof itself as opposed to the entire attic, which allows you to have a sealed attic, which is actually kind of it related to the concept of Josh Salinger's article in the past issue, where you're building a roof assembly that's a lot more resilient, so that you can treat the cavity insulation or the inside of the attic itself more like a conditioned space.
Yeah, they're like two separate entities almost. Like the entire roofing system is lifted off of the plywood sheathing. It's above it. It operates independent of what's going on inside the house.
Nice.
He's in Austin, right, Kiley?
Yeah, he's in Austin. He's a very smart man. Do you know the product LP Tech Shield, radiant barrier foil on top of plywood, or OSB? I don't remember which. He invented that. And he told me about the days of the invention. It was really interesting. So,
Really?
Cool.
yeah. I asked Brian, I was like, was this really true? Did he really? He said, it is true. It got bought and branded, but it was his idea.
So what you're describing is a normal roof sheathing, except that has a radiant barrier glued to the underside. And
well, in this case,
right,
the Galvalume itself acts as the radiant barrier. Yeah.
I'm just saying, but this Tech Shield product is roof sheathing with, and someone has to explain to me how the shiny layer works when it's glued to a sheathing layer. I don't understand the physics of that. I really don't.
The whole thing about a radiant barrier is it's not like it's like insulation where it has a resistance to heat through conduction. It's reflecting that heat.
Right.
So,
but it's glued to the plywood on the side that should be reflecting. I don't understand. How is it reflecting if it's on the plywood?
You mean how is it not transmitting that heat into the plywood?
Well, how does it even work? Like reflective surfaces don't have things on top of them, or they don't reflect, is my point, I guess.
Well,
I don't know how to answer that, but they do.
My guess is it's because it's IR and not visible light, and that probably the IR doesn't care that the wood is on top. I don't know. I am really deep into the things I don't know about.
Welcome to my world.
we never claim to be experts on any of this stuff, Patrick.
Well, now we need to find out. Let's talk about radiant barriers next time around.
That seems like a BS and beer show if I ever heard one.
That sounds cool.
You get the nerdy folks all geeking out on radiant barriers. That sounds awesome.
But I just will say one thing. I don't, like I said, like you, Patrick, I don't know enough about the applications of radiant barriers because they make more sense, it seems, in a hot climate, so we don't really deal with them up here much.
So what I've read about, and I'm going to interrupt you, I'm sorry, Rob, is they don't make sense anywhere.
Now Peter would suggest
new construction when you can do it very easily with Tech Shield or using Galvalume roofing. Building scientists have been saying for years that you should be spending that money you would have spent on installing and paying for a radiant barrier with more insulation. It is more effective at reducing attic temperatures. But there's this one guy who listens to the podcast who says that I'm an idiot for saying this, but it's not me saying this. Is what I've read.
I wonder what Peter. I think that he would disagree with you too.
But
and
what
also,
I was getting at is that there are a lot of these companies out there that market these marginally useful products and sell them as these miracle products, like those bubble wrap foil barriers.
insulating paint.
That they say if you staple that stuff on the inside of your attic, that it's like the same thing as filling it with 10 inches of insulation. And
Is that the Reflectex stuff you're
yeah,
talking
that's
about?
the stuff you got to watch out for. You know,
Yeah.
if you got a radiant barrier designed into an assembly thoughtfully, using actual physics in your calculations.
Oh, we're going to go use physics now. That's cool.
But I would say certainly you don't want to be playing with that stuff unless you know your building science principles that you're dealing with.
The other thing no one talks about is so these products lose their effectiveness when they get dusty. And like, are you supposed to go up to your attic and clean off your shiny foil layer every few years? I mean, and it doesn't matter if it's attached to the underside of the sheathing, but like, are people doing this? Has anyone measured the degradation of their effectiveness? I don't know. I got lots of questions.
Well, Peter's assemblies have been in production for 20 years, and he has nothing but good things to say about their effectiveness, and he's got data to back it up. So I think it's a conversation. And he also makes the point that it's not just for hot, humid climates, that furring system actually is a great added drainage system. So that it works very well in wet climates as well. So,
Yeah, for sure. Furring strips.
It's essentially a rain screen on the roof.
Yeah,
I know, but the roof shouldn't be getting wet under the roofing, is what I would say, right?
Well, if you've got the way he treats the ridge, it allows for rain. So
wind-driven rain could be blown into the
right.
ridge
exactly.
cap.
Yeah. Anyway, should be a good article.
Boy, I bet we're going to get all kinds of cranky people telling me I'm an idiot.
I have a feeling radiant barrier letters are coming our way.
Folks, if you have success with these things, I'd love to hear your experience. If you could answer some of the questions I had about dusting them and how it works when it's attached to the underside of sheathing, it's fascinating to me because it seems like voodoo, but I'm sure there's some good science. But I think, as Kiley suggests, or maybe Rob, that these products have been oversold, right? They're promising to solve problems that they're probably not able to solve. Like a lack of insulation, for example, is one of the things I hear. Don't put insulation up in your attic if you're in the southeast or the southwest. Instead, spend your money on a radiant barrier. Well, that's not true. Maybe both is better than just insulation, but you still need insulation and a lot of it in your roof assembly, even if you have a radiant barrier. So, what does Peter Pfeiffer do with regard to his insulation layer?
He uses spray.
Goes on
he uses spray
in
foam.
the attic.
Yeah, a spray foam under the between the rafters, and I'm trying to remember if there was someplace else. When he first started off with this, he was just laying foil or installing foil between the rafters. That was the first rendition of this thing. But yeah, he does use spray foam, but he uses it very sparingly and in targeted areas. I know between the rafters, but there's another place in which he puts it, and I'm drawing a blank on where that goes.
Because he wants to have the mechanical equipment in the attic like everybody in Texas does, because you don't have basements.
They don't have
largely.
basements, right?
Okay, well, we're probably revealing our, limitation of knowledge with regard to hot climates, right?
Yeah, we really need to get somebody on here from down south. Do we have anybody that we know?
You should get Peter Pfeiffer on. He's like a guru. He actually led the charge with LEED certification. I mean, he would make a great Pro Talk.
Yeah, maybe this is a Pro
guest.
Talk, Patrick.
Yeah,
sounds good.
He could explain his system in
Peter,
full.
I don't know if you're listening. I don't know why you'd listen to this dumb show, but if you want to be on Pro Talk, I'd love to have you.
I bet he'd do it. He likes to talk.
Oh my gosh! So this comes from my friend Jim Collins, who's a landscaped architect from Burlington, Ontario. He was on a Pro Talk talking about landscape architecture, and the Canadian government is spending billions of dollars. Can one of you click on this link to tell me exactly how many billions of dollars they're spending to train folks for trade work. And I think it's fantastic. Did
Yeah,
you
me
pull this
too.
up, Rob?
Yeah.
I've got it. 30. Oh wait. 32 million. Is that right? No, that's not the
I
right.
hope it's more than that.
4.4 billion.
Yeah, billions are what I remember. And they want to train how many people? Does it say? Anyway,
2,000.
the Canadian government's getting into the business of training people to do trade work, which I think is a fantastic idea because
Well-
God knows we need more of them.
Specifically, energy advisors.
Yeah, right?
Which
to
is so
do
cool.
weatherization and energy improvements. And I think that's the right approach because of our kind of haphazard method in this country where you have to find an energy rater and then find a contractor and hope that they agree on what to do. It seems a little disjointed. It would seem to be better if we had a real systematic way to improve our existing housing stock. And I think everyone acknowledges that building efficient new homes is a good idea, but our bigger problem are the millions of existing housing units in this country that use, I believe it's a third of our energy and contribute an equal amount, a third to our global warming emissions. And once again, I might be deep into the things I don't know.
Well, that sounds right. That sounds right
Seems
to
to be a
me.
theme of this episode, huh?
I'm going to blame my back pain when someone calls me on it. It's like,
Well, it's also an excellent plan for the future, right? I mean, this is going to be, we've said it before, this is the kind of thing that keeps coming up, I think, for good reason. But these energy advisors are going to, there's going to be high demand for that, I think, coming
my
down the
question is,
pike.
how are the folks who need this work done going to pay for it? Like you can train the folks to do it, but who's going to pay for the improvements? That's, I don't know that that's addressed in the new program.
Well, the people who are writing into our show to figure out how to upgrade their houses.
You think they'll do it themselves based on the feedback from one of these raters?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Well, I
You know,
don't
you
know.
gotta pay
I'm
for
sure
the
it'll be a
work
mixed
once-
bag. Yeah. Right.
Well, but also you see where we've in the recent decade or so advanced our energy code so that it's a lot of the things that were just optional things that or were only done by the early adopters of energy efficient home building are now required in the code. So maybe it's going to be code driven too,
Yeah, but do you think
That's
the
the
code is
hope.
going to force people to upgrade their existing homes?
I'm not unless they're involved in a remodeling project, I would imagine,
Well, I think in that article they talk about $5,000 grants and $40,000
Right. There's
interest-free
incentives.
loans.
Yeah. Incentives. Right.
So it sounds like it's a comprehensive
So I should have read
program.
the link is what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jim. I was interested, but I guess I got distracted by the time it got to the details.
Yep.
So $5,000 grants, Jeff, and loans up to $40K.
Yeah.
You could probably
interest-free.
do a lot of work for $40,000 to improve the air tightness and efficiency of a home.
Yeah, I would think.
The thing that troubles me is oftentimes like installing new heating and cooling equipment is one of the go-to things that contractors, HVAC contractors, want to do, right? And they tell folks you're going to save a lot of money on your heating cooling bills because, your old boiler was 80% efficient on the best days and your new boiler is going to be 90 plus efficient. And so you're going to save 10% on your heating and cooling costs. But something I learned from Mike Lombardi is that if you buy one of these modulating condensing boilers to heat your hot water for your domestic or for your space heating, you need higher water temperatures than these modulating boilers are meant to run at. So you're not going to see the efficiency numbers that you could get if you use lower water temperature. But the emitters like radiators and these unit heaters and stuff need hotter water than these modulating systems are meant to operate at. So you're not going to get the efficiency gains that people often claim you do. And of course, no one measures that once the system's installed. So that's one of the things people spend money on, and oftentimes you could have spent that same money and improved your envelope and saved a lot more money for something that's not going to wear out, unlike your modulating boiler, which is going to last for 10 or 20 years, right?
I always get really excited when I talk to designers, particularly, who think about it in that way. Like the first line of defense should be the envelope. Then you get into the equipment. Not the equipment is the solution.
Yeah, because if you put in a system based on your current needs right now, and then you go and do this envelope, then all of a sudden you're going to have an oversized system, and it's not.
And it's probably oversized to begin with, right? 2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, that's one of the things you have to be so careful of, because even the people who are installing some of these newer high performance systems, like the mini splits I have in my house, they more often than not are not going to be doing accurate load calculations to size the system, and that's like you just have to do that.
Did you do that for your house? Do you know how to do those calculations?
I did my own heat load, sort of using one of those online calculators and measuring everything in the house and knowing what insulation I put in the walls. But, mine was still sort of a rough guess. But it was better than, I think, a lot of people who are trying to sell you an HVAC system are gonna do.
Did your mini split installer say you were crazy that you needed more mini splits and more capacity? Or
no, and actually, I kind of wish he was a little bit more. I think he just assumed I was knowledgeable enough to know what I wanted and just basically gave me what I asked for. And in retrospect, just because the system was so expensive, I was like, I'm still heating with my pellet stove. I can get away with this size system because I'm probably going to make my envelope better over time. And I probably should have gone with one more outdoor unit and 2 more heads inside, but that would have practically doubled the price of the project.
You're talking like 10 grand for those parts, right?
Yeah. And so
how many heads do you have, Rob?
I've got 3. I've got 2 8,000 or 9,000 BTU units, one in our bathroom upstairs, one in our kitchen, and then I've got a 12,000 or 15,000 BTU unit in the living room. And so that's more of like an open plan space. So that's that, and plus I have an open staircase in the front. So basically the bigger unit deals with all the open front public rooms in the house. The little unit upstairs basically does our bathroom and our bedroom, and then the other one does the kitchen, so that leaves a lot of our rooms unheated, like my office is unheated, my daughter's bedroom is unheated, our laundry room's unheated. But because those rooms are so much better insulated and air sealed, there's enough heat sort of filtering in from the rest of the house that it actually works. But
have you measured the difference in temperature, Rob? Is it noticeable?
I have not, but I definitely do. I definitely could use some supplemental heating and cooling in my daughter's bedroom of all spaces. So we put a window unit in her room, where I wish we had a single head that did my office and her room.
But with the doors closed, that wouldn't work anyway, right? I mean,
well, what I would do is I would actually put it, because I have a little unfinished attic above her bedroom. So I would basically be able to put one of those ducted units that would feed both the bedroom and the office.
I kind of think we're going to see more of those. In fact, in issue 302 of Fine Homebuilding, I'm charged with coming up with a feature on the new variable refrigerant flow heat pumps and air conditioners that are, the top of the line equipment for major manufacturers now. And they use a lot of the technology that was limited to mini splits in a central sized unit. And I look forward to those things getting in the marketplace, because it solves a lot of the problems with refrigeration equipment with, they're sized for the worst case scenario, and almost never you have the worst case scenario. So the thing always ends up being sized, but these systems can ramp up and down to deal with the exact load. So I think it's promising technology, but they are expensive.
It's hard for me to believe that as these things become more popular and come down in price, that they're not going to completely replace the old school AC systems. I mean, I guess there's always a demand for something that's less than ideal because of cost. But so one of our colleagues in the marketing department at Taunton sent me a link to a house a friend of hers was looking at the other day, and it was one of those 60s, early 70s modern houses with the tongue and groove board ceiling. And so basically there's no attic. It's just, exposed beams, lots of glass, and it was built into a hillside, so it didn't have a basement. So it's like the worst case scenario for trying to put a new heating and cooling system in, because there's no place to run ductwork. And that's exactly what she said. She's like, oh, my friend put an offer in on this house, and the house had been completely renovated, but they didn't put central air in. And she's like, I can't. She's like, do you know why? And I said, basically because there's no convenient place to run the ducts without tearing open all the walls and building chases. And and it was one of those modern houses that has like, there's only a half high wall separating the kitchen. So it's like very open plan. It's like, the mini splits are probably the perfect thing for that. Or as we get into these sort of hybrid systems that have like semi-ducted systems hooked up to the same outdoor units that the mini splits have.
I would love to see more like spiral duct installed in residential setting like you see in commercial buildings. Like you put all the ductwork in the conditioned space, you make it kind of an architectural element. But I'm weird, most folks aren't going to want to see ductwork in their living space, right?
Yeah. But, if someone with a really modern aesthetic bought this house that we're just talking about, it's got that vaulted ceiling with exposed beams. They did it all in black and white, so it's very industrial, modern looking. And having a big black spiral duct running down hanging below the ridge, which actually I think would be pretty cool in that house.
We should buy it, Rob.
Yeah.
We're the only two people that would live in that house.
It does sound like a man cave.
Well, unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks to Rob, Kiley, and Jeff for joining me, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please, 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 I'm begging you. My back is killing me.
Sure
I'm still
are.
doing this show. Leave a review at the iTunes store or wherever you're listening, because it helps other folks find our podcast. Stay safe, everybody. Keep craft alive. Happy building.